Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we'll get started. Thank you for being here and welcome to the City of San Angelo Redistricting Public Forum. Our goal here tonight is for you to hear what our consultant has, what work he's done, and what staff has presented to council. This will be information that council has seen or will see, and we want you to see that. And there'll be an opportunity for you to make comment. When that time to make comment or ask questions comes up, we'd like you to come stand at the podium and use the microphones. Don't be bashful about speaking into the microphone. We're recording and we'll post this event online later on. Again, I'm sorry, I'm Michael Dane, Assistant City Manager. Sorry about that. Lucy, you're supposed to keep me on script. Sorry. We have some council members here, a couple. They won't be making any decisions tonight. Again, this is an opportunity for you to see information, for us to hear from you. Robert Bass is our consultant who's done the difficult technical work associated with this, and I think he's going to kick off tonight's presentation.
Thank you, sir. I talk about 8 hours a day, so having hay fever at a time like this doesn't help. I'd like to give you an overview of the process of redistricting, what it is and why we do it. If you have any questions, I suppose I can try to answer those. Redistricting is a concept that is vested in the United States Constitution. It arises out of the requirement imposed upon the Congress to reapportion the congressional seats after each federal census. So since 1790, we've conducted a census, and then we divide the total population of the United States, men, women, and children, by 435, the number of seats in the Congress. It's changed over the years, but we've had 435 since about 1938, I believe. And that gives you roughly, the purpose is to make sure that the voice of our representative represents roughly the same number of people, so that the weight of a vote cast by a representative officer is representing roughly the same number of people. Over time, case law, court law, has determined that concept that we call one person, one vote should be applicable to the local level as well. Texas, and well, all local governments, cities, schools, hospital districts, anybody that elects their governing body from single-member districts is now required after each census to evaluate their boundaries, determine the population within their separate single-member districts, and if necessary, redraw those boundaries so as to balance out the population. Now, the Congress has to be down to really minuscule numbers, almost perfect balance. Local governments, it candidly gets harder to balance in the smaller jurisdictions. So as you go down the pecking order from the nation to the state, to the local level, we do it by census blocks. And so one census block might have enough people in it to skew the balance. And so local governments are allowed to have a range of deviation, or you divide the population of the school district in this case, or the city, by the number of seats. And so in doing that, the city of San Angelo is estimated to have 99,893 people. You divide that by 6, and an ideal size of a precinct or ward would be 16,649. About 2% is about 200 people. So if the top to bottom range for local governments by case law cannot exceed 10% top to bottom. So you take the most overpopulated precinct, derive a percentage from the ideal, and then your most underpopulated ward or precinct, determine a percentage of deviation. You add those two together, disregarding the plus or minus sign. Anything over 10% is presumptively unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. When we started this work, the deviation range here in San Angelo was 25.75%, double what it is permissible. The largest precinct in terms of population was Ward 6, overpopulated by about 2,065 people, or 12.4%. The most underpopulated was Ward 3 at 2,223 people, below the ideal, or 13.35%. So those two percentages added together equal 25.75%. So that was the task that we started out with. Typically speaking, you make as few changes as you possibly can. You don't want to disrupt established patterns of voting and the like. So you try to find population numbers that are harmonious with the existing precincts, basically. Once you determine that you have to redraw boundaries under the constitutional test, you also have to comply with the Voting Rights Act. That act was passed in 1965, and it required governmental units in certain areas of the country to submit any plan that it had to alter or amend or modify any election policy, practice, procedure that affect the right to vote. That was based on evidentiary hearings that established that discriminatory patterns were being practiced in large numbers of the states. And so the Voting Rights Act required what was known as pre-clearance, meaning that the governmental units had to draft a plan, had to submit it to the Department of Justice for what was known as pre-clearance, which a legal review to determine whether or not the plan satisfied the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act was interpreted to mean that where minority communities existed in sufficient numbers, that if they were allowed to vote in enough cohesive communities of interest, that there was a reasonable opportunity to elect minority representatives of choice. That does not mean it guarantees an outcome, but you could not fragment or dilute that population by dividing it up. Or, on the same token, if there was a significant number, you could not pack minority population into a single district if there was enough population to have an impact on more than one district. So that is the framework that we've worked within since 1964. In 2013, in the case of Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder, the Supreme Court vacated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act on the basis that the Congress had renewed the Voting Rights Act every 5 to 10 years, but had never done the fact-finding that the original bill had done. And so Justice Roberts opined that maybe racial discrimination is no longer a factor. We have elected a black president. Maybe without facts, we don't know. So he charged basically the Congress to re-examine the Voting Rights Act and to establish whether or not there were patterns or practices that were discriminatory. And as of yet, the Congress has not been able to pass the Voting Rights Act. It's been up before the Congress at least twice. It's not made it out of the Congress. So that is the process that we went through in looking at your existing boundaries. In order to aid us in that evaluation, we looked at what is known as your benchmarks, Benchmarks is just a term of art that the courts use, and they basically go say, when was the last time your county or your city, your school submitted a plan for pre-clearance, and what were the minority percentages in the voting districts then? And that sets a benchmark so that in a subsequent effort to redraw lines, you should meet or exceed those benchmarks if you can, without going to extremes that are based solely on race. As a result of Reno versus Shaw, or Shaw versus Reno, it's a 1986 case out of North Carolina. North Carolina had enough population growth that they were entitled to a new congressional seat, and the black population in North Carolina had grown to such a point that it was thought that they needed to create a minority-majority congressional district. And the way the legislature in North Carolina did that is there was not really enough population in any one place to make that possible. So they went down the interstate highway. In every town and city they went through, they pulled the black population out of that neighborhood. And so you had a congressional district that was about 135 miles long, and the court said it looked like a string of pearls going down the interstate. A challenge was made on the basis that that was not an appropriate means because it violated the Equal Protection Act, saying that those populations had little in common other than the color of their skin, and that was too much of an emphasis on race. The Supreme Court in Reno versus Shaw agreed, says that in redistricting, race cannot be the predominant factor, but it certainly is a very important factor. So it's a tough call sometimes, where is enough or where is too much. But at the benchmarks that were established in 2011 were in the predominant racial makeup of your community 10 years ago. The Hispanic population was 38.49%. The black population was 3.99%, and the Anglo population was 52.05%. That's 10 years ago. Today, the Anglo population is 48.17. The black population is 3.85, and the Hispanic population is 42.35. There's also been a significant increase in other. Not all of us have, we're sort of mixed breeds. We all are mutts. We have different genetic makeup, but a lot of people, or more people at this cycle, check the box other, in that there's 26 different racial ethnicities, and there's a other, and then there's a multi. And so more people checked other or multi than did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, 2.98 said they were multi, and now that's up to 3.25. So all of that comes into play, but in the proposed plan, the racial makeup of in 2011, the three largest minority content precincts were Precinct 2, that had a 42.25% Hispanic. Precinct 3 had a 62.35% Hispanic, and 4 had a 50.34%. 10 years later, the plan that's proposed has a 47.34% Hispanic content in 2, a 59.04% content in District 3, and a 53.96% in Precinct 4. So 2 and 4 are increases of about 3 to 4%. There is a slight decline in District 3 from 62.3 to 59.04% Hispanic. but that is not, that's not necessarily a factor of the redistricting. It's more of a population distribution. You can't really draw in heavier numbers without potentially violating Reno v. Shaw. And so you try to make the changes that we do with making the least change possible and keeping lines that are coherent, consistent, logical to the extent we can. When the court says when you look at a map and it looks like a bowl of spaghetti, a bizarre-looking district raises questions as why was it drawn that way, and if race is the predominant factor, then it becomes potentially a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. So that is a sort of a thumbnail sketch of the process we went through. I'd be glad at the appropriate time to answer any questions you may have.
Good evening. I'm John James, Director of Planning and Development Services, and we just have a short presentation here to go over some of what Mr. Bass just talked about, but we've got some maps that will explain some of this. As he mentioned, our city charter does require us to shift population between districts if they get too unbalanced, and that's where we are. As mentioned, the two districts in the south where most of our growth has occurred have become overpopulated compared to the others, and so some of this was shifting population from the districts that have too many people under the current districts into those that are underpopulated. And I think he may have mentioned this, but our total population and our voting age population decreased among some ethnic groups and then increased among others. But districts 3 and 4 prior to this change were majority minority districts, and they will remain so after this change. So there's no, there's not a significant enough shift of population to affect that. We are accepting public comments tonight after this brief presentation, but then there will also be a public hearing at the City Council meeting on next Tuesday, December 7th. So here, I know you can't read this, but this is just an overview map to show you the context of where these changes are in the city. And on the next map you'll see, but there are a couple of changes over in this area, and then a change over here, and then a small one down here. And that's, again, just the context of the overall city, and the colors there represent the current districts as they are today and have been for the last 10 years. So this is a little bit closer look. And there'll be a zoom in on each one of these, but basically these are the 4 different areas where we took population from one district and moved them into another. So the first change here is the area in orange, and you can see there they're labeled, the portion to the left there is going from SMD 6 to SMD 2, and then there's another piece down here that's also going from 6 to 2, and then this little piece here goes from 5 to 2. And again, that's basically to shift population out of 6, where we had growth, into District 2 to help balance those out. And you can see, we can come back to these if there are questions, but then you can see that's the total number of people that are being shifted from one district to another, and the breakdown of the racial categories for each of those. The next area is a very small one, but it's going from District 4 to District 5. It's basically just 3 blocks in that area. And again, it's just, as he mentioned, Mr. Bass, in some cases, we just needed very slight shifts of population to balance these districts. And this is one that helped bring that balance between 4 and 5 by just shifting about 150 people from one to the other. This is another fairly small change from 6 to District 1. You might ask why we moved people into District 1 if that was one that was overpopulated, but there was excess population in 6. Some of that we shifted north, but that wasn't quite enough to balance the district, so we shifted some from 6 to 1. But then, as you'll see on the next one, in a different area, more was shifted from one to another district. So it was kind of, shifting around. And of course, as he mentioned, all of these district changes have to be right at the boundaries. So places had to be found where there was the right number of population to move, but they had to be right at the edge. And then this is probably the biggest shift, both in population and in area. This is a shift from that District 1 that saw quite a bit of growth, and it moves it into District 3. And this, like I said, was the biggest shift of about 2,300 people. And you can see the breakdown there. Again, that was kind of a brief overview. I guess at this point, we would just take questions either about the process or how these numbers played out. And I'll just, one more reminder to make sure and come to the podium so we can get your comments and everybody can hear them. Nope, sorry. Yeah, if you want to just come up.
Okay, first of all, my name is Neal Allen. I live in either in 6 or down further, and I think it's 6. I'm concerned because the maps where you make the changes don't have any streets on them. So as a point of reference, it makes us hard to find that out. Number 2, if I understand it right, Lane Carter is resigning and running for county judge. Therefore, I know someone that wanted to run for District 5, and you just took a sliver of it out. So please look at Area 1 map. There are 3 orange parts there. One of them is single-member District 5 to single-member District 2. It's a little funny part there, right there. I'd like to know what the population change is in that area and why that has to be done.
I'll defer to Julie on the population. I think that was an area that did not have any population in it.
Actually, it does, because somebody I know lives in that area.
And it was basically, in order to get these 2 into 2, they have to be connecting, they have to be contiguous. And so that piece was needed to tie this piece and this piece into 2. Otherwise, they wouldn't touch 2, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're tied together by the precinct. So even though we're dealing in districts, we do have to abide by the precincts for the county. And just to speak a little bit on the resignation of Councilmember Carter for SMD 5, it'll be the current residents that are living there now. These boundaries will not take effect yet, so they wouldn't be.
So you're saying that a person that is in
Someone who
5 now can run, and if they are no longer in 5, they can continue to stay on the city council?
The boundaries as proposed are not.
We would need to talk to legal about that. We need to get a legal opinion.
But you're saying there's someone in this area that would like to run in 5, but now
That's
they're being
right.
moved out of 5.
And they are in 5 right now. And as long as it needs to be contiguous, why can't we correct it on the blue part and leave what's part of 5 and 5 and go around the back side of it?
I think we actually looked at that, and Mr. Bass may recall, but part of this area, it's a large area with few streets that break it up.
Well, we wouldn't know what streets because they're not on the map.
Well, yeah, and I will point out that this map was available on the website as well, and you can zoom in on this, and it does have the streets. Well, we can't zoom in on it here, but if you download.
When I zoom in on it, I get blurred. No.
Oh, you can't read the street names?
No.
Okay, we
No.
can
So
probably
that's why
correct
I
that.
am-
Yeah. I'll just to finish that answer to that question, This area up in here, pulling this in to tie those two pieces together, there's actually no population in most of this area. But then if we pulled in the block right here, I don't know if you can see that, that's the apartment complex. And to pull that in, it pulls in too many people. So it's either too few or too many. And that's why that, the smaller area you just talked about was selected instead.
Good evening, I'm Shirley Spears, I'm a resident of Single Member District 5. So I want to follow up on what she was just asking. I believe I understood her to say that she knows someone who currently lives in what is now Single Member District 5 that would be in the area that moves them to Single Member District 2. And I think I understood Julie to say that there's no population, but clearly there is somebody over there in that section. So I'd kind of like to get a better understanding of that, number one. And I think what she was asking is if they are in 5 today and they decide to run for city council because of the change that we're going to have with the city council person in 5, how will that be handled is what she was trying to get to, I think, right? In terms of they're in 5, they run in 5, but it's going to be moved to 2. So I think we need a little bit more detailed explanation on that. And then if I'm understanding the change, if you go back to the other map, please, on the change from
This
5.
one?
Yeah, that you're moving that slither from 5 to 2, however many it makes up. The map is very difficult to read, yes, when you try to go to the street map. But did I also understand that the reason you didn't move the people from 5 to 6 is because 6 is already overpopulated? I want to make sure I understood that.
That's correct.
Okay, so then I guess my next question is, what would have been the difference to move it from 5 to 6? What percentage over would that have created if you had moved that slither from 5 to 6? Because I'm hearing you say there's no population, but clearly there is population there. I know I asked quite a few questions, but that's what I'm trying to get to. Because it looks like overall, from 6 to 2, if I'm looking at the map correctly, John, it's 769 people that you're saying from
I think
6
that's,
to 2, but where is the number for 5 to 2? Because
I might defer to Julie on that, but I think the chart is the total shift of all
For
three,
both?
of all 3 changes.
Okay,
right?
so then I'd like to go back to what I was asking before, which the other lady was trying to confirm. This is saying that there are no residents, that there's no population count in this section of 5 that you're moving. Clearly there is. So how do we get to an understanding of the population that's in 5 that's being moved to 2?
That's what I was just trying to.
And I guess the other side of that is, what would be the point of moving that if there's no one there? What's the point? If
Well,
there's-
as I said, I guess my understanding, and we're trying to look on the maps to see what the population might be. My understanding was that even though without any population, it was moved so that these 3 areas would be contiguous. So
I understand.
that they would connect.
Okay, so then the other part of that is, so can we really say that there is no population in that slither from 5 to 2? Or are we just simply saying that in order to achieve the contiguous boundaries and not to increase population in 6, that was the only way to draw that section?
Well, we'll have to do some research to see if there's, the numbers that we were looking at showed, per the census, that sliver did not have any population. So we can confirm that, but we'll have to look at the maps. Yeah, and it's harder to see on this map, but it's
Can that be
basically there,
enlarged?
Glenna at the loop. I don't know if you can turn on the, oh, actually, can you go up to that and turn on the aerial photo? It should sound like.
There are 3 streets west of the HEB on Shirley Way that are part of 5. And that's what I'm trying to get a reference to, like maps with no names on the streets.
Yeah, and I believe, and we can definitely have this corrected and have a clear answer by the city council meeting, but I believe that this is the loop on the north end of that. This is Arden Road, and this is Glenna, and this is it TLC Way? And just looking on I don't have the census data in front of me, but the aerial photography shows that entire area as all commercial. So it may just be, if we look at the streets, I guess if maybe after the meeting you could get us the address of the person you're talking about or the block that they're in, we can confirm it. But just looking at the map here, it appears that whole area is just an industrial and commercial area with no homes in it.
Well, I was just trying to compare area on the map to what I have here. And there's a big red square around it. So
Yeah, guys, if I could, I think if we're going to continue.
Thank you.
We're going to continue to have a conversation, ma'am. We need you at the microphone so that your voice is picked up on the recording.
And I'll just answer, she mentioned the boxes. Those boxes were just to identify the area where the changes are occurring, but it's not the entire area within that box. That's just a way to kind of quickly show, if you're glancing at the map, which areas to look at, but then you have to just look a little closer to see where the boundary is actually changing between each district.
Okay, so then my other question that I had posed, John, was the change that hasn't been answered yet, the shift of persons from 4 to, I believe it was 2, if you can go to that map.
Was that the big change?
No,
That
it's
one?
not a big one.
Oh, I'm sorry, from,
From 4, yeah,
This
okay,
one.
from 4 to 5, I had it wrong. Okay, so can you tell me the areas that makes up, because doesn't seem like it's a lot of people, but 151 people from 4 to 5. And so then I'm thinking of when we get ready to do the school district changes, what that's going to look like because of how we have to keep things together. So that's my other future concern is when you move the single-member district to 5, it potentially then says, okay, when we do the school district redistricting, that could have an impact on at least the elementary and middle schools in that area, depending on where that move is from 4 to 5.
Yeah.
So where is that?
yeah, it's basically a 3-block area between, it looks like Hassel Street to Garfield, and then from San Antonio, basically up to the Loop.
That it's moving into?
It's moving from 4 to 5, correct?
Okay, but the area you just mentioned is 5. The streets that you just mentioned, or are you talking about right off the Loop in Garfield?
Yeah, so the Loop is on this north end.
Okay.
San Antonio Street's on the south end.
Right.
This side is Hassel, and this side is Garfield. So that is,
Okay, so you're on the other side. Okay.
yeah, it's currently in 4 and going into 5.
Okay. And so I know that our percentages have changed for the Anglo population and the Black population in terms of fewer number of people, and trying to understand what is required for the, making sure that we're keeping ourselves straight with the Voting Rights Act. What did the numbers really come out to in terms of the lower Anglo population and the lower Black population in each of these instances where you're moving from one to another?
I don't have that information here. I don't know if Julia does. We have those numbers. On here, we just have the numbers shifting from one to the other. I think the information we had presented at the last council meeting included the total numbers for the new districts versus the old districts.
And so does that put us at less than 10% with the change, or are we right at 10% deviation now that, with this proposed
With
map?
the proposed, I think we go well under 10%. I think
Okay.
the highest is maybe 2 or 3%.
So in all the changes you're getting, I'm sorry, what was that?
3.47. And we've underpopulated the growth areas so that there's room to grow, hopefully in 10 years if we do the work, and luck helps a lot.
Okay.
You don't have to redo lines again in 10 years.
Right, and so we know that a lot of the housing development, for instance, is moving south. And so was there any consideration when you looked at how you're looking at the maps, the redrawing of the maps, because a lot of the new build is south of town, which
Yeah,
is,
and that's, I think that was part of his answer, was that we underpopulated slightly those growth area districts, so 6 and 1,
So that we could
as growth
potentially-
occurs, in 10 years, it might not be out of whack more than 10%, so we might not have to do this again in 10 years.
okay. I'm good for now, thank you.
Good evening. My name's Kiloperez. I just want to make a few comments here. I noticed that the total population increase, 97% of the total increase in population is Latino. According to the numbers that I have here, the data that's been provided, 97% of the population increase, 97% of the population increase is Latino vote. So each of the districts increased considerably in Latino population. Percentage-wise, each of the 5 of the 6 districts, the percentage increased in Latino population. But in single-member District 3, the percentage, based on the data here, dropped from 66.82% to 62.12%. So that district has been, as far as the Latino population, the voting population, that's based on the elections we've had in the past 4 years, which have been, many have been very, very close. 4%, actually it's a 4.7% decrease in the dilution of the Latino population. The gentleman here earlier was saying something about 59%, that the actual amount is 59%. So I don't know if that number's correct or this number's incorrect. But if that's the case, then we're looking at a 7 to 8% decrease in
In that district.
that district.
And I think the short answer to that is that we had District 1 with excess population
Correct.
that needed to be moved into 3. And really, the only place that was possible to get those numbers was in this area, which proportionally had a higher Anglo population. So shifting that area into 3 did slightly dilute the Hispanic population. Again, it's still above 60%, and we believe that meets the standards that we were looking at. But in looking at other options, there was really no option to move population out of 1 into 3 while still keeping that same percentage.
Well, there's always options. I mean, you could always move some of 4 to 3 and some of the northern border, which would be, I think, 2 to 4, and then just go around the edges, go back around counterclockwise and change that. Because my concern is the elections have been close, and just a small variation in diluting the Latino vote can make a huge difference in the election. So that is my issue with that. And I don't know if, I know it can be, something can be done about it. It's just a matter of making the effort or wanting to make the effort to do that. So those are my comments. Just to let you know that based on the information here, 97% of the increase in population is Latino. So it doesn't make sense to me for District 3 to have its voters, the Latino vote, diluted. So that's an issue with me. That's an issue with single-member District 3. So I just want to make those comments. Thank you.
There was a 3.31% decline in the voting age Hispanic population between 10 years ago and this proposed plan. Not 7 or 8%.
Okay, I wanted to add on to what he was just speaking about in terms of District 3. And I also wanted to bring up the fact that in the state of Texas, when we look at the overall, that Texas is now a majority-minority state. And so I think that that's part of what his concern was, is that the whole state is now more minority than anything, with the largest population being the Hispanic population in the state that has increased it. And now, instead of giving them more, you're taking that population and you're decreasing what they have. And I think, you're shaking your head, yes, I think that's what we're asking for an explanation about. Because it doesn't make sense if I got 12 more over here and this one had 3, why am I taking from the 12 and giving over here? That just doesn't balance out when I'm just old school arithmetic. It just doesn't balance out to me. And I think that's the point. I think we would like to have an explanation of that. And I know there are people here that are possibly thinking, well, that shouldn't matter. It does matter. If your state, one of the largest states in the union, is now majority minority, now why are your city districts reducing, which reduces their representation?
And I understand your comments, and I'm not challenging that, but you have to recall that Ward 3 was underpopulated by 2,223 people. And we did look at trying to keep as high a percentage, not just of Hispanic, but also other minority voters. But we had to put so much population into 3 that keeping that percentage higher did not seem to be possible without going to some of the extremes that the Reno v. Shaw case says we should not engage in predominantly race-based analytics. It's a tough thing to do. It's harder than you might think.
I'm a little bit familiar with your tool that you've been using, so I mean, I appreciate the maps that we've seen since the last city council meeting and so forth. But I think you're getting a lot of comments and questions about, well, what if, and what if, and what if? So I don't know if you have your tool available for us to see what the what if would look like, but I think that would maybe make us feel better if we can see what the what if would look like if you were to take into consideration some of the suggestions from the young man that just spoke with making the change. And I hear what you're saying, Mr. Bass, about you're trying to stay away, make sure you don't break any of the rules from the legal case of, was it 86? But at the same time, we'd kind of like to see that, I think that's why we're here, is to see what some other options could be as opposed to what has just been proposed. And we're talking numbers, and, you know, we don't see those numbers on screen, but we're trying to write it down and we're trying to keep up. So what would it look like with some other suggestions in terms of even looking at the numbers of people that you're moving? What would that look like?
Well, I would be glad to try to work with anyone who would like to propose any lines, but I have tools where we did use to try to find blocks, census blocks, that had significant minority content. By that I mean over 50% of that census block was Hispanic, for example. And what we found by adding as much as population as we did over, you know, I forget the numbers that actually went into the, but we needed to add roughly in the neighborhood of between 1,500 and 2,000 people. And sometimes you find pockets of, say, Hispanic population, black population, fairly close, but to get to them, you have to go through census blocks that are more Anglo. And so by the time you get to that pocket of Hispanic population, you've weakened the overall percentage, and the blocks have to be contiguous. You don't get to have a checkerboard district. It has to all blend together. I'm not saying it's conceivable that there is a plan that would increase the percentage in 3. I'm not going to say that that's impossible, but all of the options we looked at, and we did look at several in the development of the plan, weren't successful in being any better than the plan that we're proposing. If someone wants to present a plan, I'm sure the council would be glad to evaluate it, but it's hard to say, surely we can do better, and maybe we could. I just don't know how to articulate that the plan we came up with is what the best we could come up with. If somebody wants to sit down with us, I'm willing to do that exercise. But the time is relatively short. For the first time since 1790, the census data was not released on time. Normally it's released in March, so we have roughly 6 months to do the work. We didn't get the data until then in raw form in August, middle of August, and we had to do the same amount of work in about 6 weeks. And the county and the city have to come up with a plan no later than February the 7th. So there's scant time to continue to bat this ball around. But I understand your concerns. A 3% decline of Hispanic alone, but there's also the overall percentage is not, I think it's very superficially, it's not that much actually. But, go ahead, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Susie Smith, and I'm District 6, and I just, I can appreciate what you all have done and the time, that it took to do it, and I can appreciate Shirley's position, and I would just remind us that not all Anglos vote the same, not all blacks vote the same, and not all Hispanics vote the same. So I can appreciate the concern, but I think it's good to keep that in mind.
And I appreciate your comments, and I'm well aware that by ethnicity or race, we don't vote the same, but that's not the point we're trying to make. There are a lot of other things that come into play when you have people who have same or similar interest in terms of looking at how we're distributing their representation all the way up to the congressional district. And of course, the state of Texas was one of the lucky ones where we were able to get 2 new congressional districts. And then again, I'm going back to the increased population for the state, and that helped us to get the 2 additional congressional districts, and so I want to make sure we're aware of that. I also want to make sure that there's a little bit more clarity on the data being released from the census. The census was taken in 2010, and I think we were all, even though we were dealing with COVID, I hope we were all awake with why the data took so long to be released and all of the negative and messaging that was put out there about the census that had several communities intimidated to not even complete the census. So I don't want us to say that, and I don't work for the U.S. Census Bureau, but I don't want us to think that the U.S. Census Bureau did not release the data in a timely manner like they normally do. It was COVID and a lot of other factors, and of course, like I said, the negative messaging that came along with that. So when we look at also having 6 weeks, as you mentioned, Mr. Bass, compressed time to complete this issue, I want to also remind us that we recently got a new Secretary of State that could have adjusted the timeline that it was necessary to get this job complete. That timeline was not adjusted, and so it required you all to still make your same timeline, which compressed it into that. So I don't want anyone to think that the census caused the problem, because that really wasn't the problem. We need to make sure we look at all of it and why we are at this point of rushing. I hear you, Mr. Bass, saying you would be happy to work with someone who's interested in drawing the lines. Again, I'm going back to this compressed timeline that we have. This is going to be presented again next week at the City Council meeting. Today is Thursday, so we have tomorrow, then we have Monday, and then we have Tuesday where it's going to be presented. So because of the rush timeline that has been established by our Secretary of State, there's little likelihood. I think a good time would have been from the last City Council meeting when I know I went before Council and one of our City Council members also went before Council asking for the additional meeting. I think that in those last almost 2 weeks that would have been a more appropriate time to perhaps work with the community who was interested in looking at potential redrawing of the maps rather than now having only 2.5 days to do that.
Looking at the data, the total population data that we have here, the Anglo population in San Angelo, in the city of San Angelo, is 48%, and the Latino population is 42%. So we're looking at 90% of the population is Anglo and Latino. But as we look, and I understand the different blocks of ethnicity and population, different the way the city's cut up. I understand the data was released late because of the previous president. There's a reason for that. But still, I still have an issue with District 3, with the total population, the majority of the population being Latino, and Single Member District 3 going down. And then, like I said, of course, there's time restraints on it as one of the tools used against minority populations. But still, there could always have been, there still is an option. And if possible, we'd like to see what those options could be before the lines are drawn. With the technology that we have today, I'm sure that could be done pretty quickly. But the issue is that most ethnicities vote along a certain line. And there's some deviations from that, I understand that. But it's very important because of the close elections that when you dilute a district, that's going to have a negative impact or a positive impact. But in this case, it's going to have a negative impact on District 3. So hopefully, we can have some other options here. Thank you.
Do we have any more? No more? Last call? All right. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I do have one more comment since we're about to do last call. We have asked for a couple of things, and I'm just, before we close down the meeting, I'm wondering if city staff is going to consider that, along with our consultant, Mr. Bass, to do some of the considerations, the attempts to redraw. So I just kind of know what is the action item. I know we've asked for some things. So what is it that staff is going to be able to do between now and Tuesday before it's presented for final vote?
Well, I think what I heard is the consultant is willing to work up a proposal that somebody else has prepared. And if you have a specific line you'd like drawn, I think I heard him say he'd be willing to plot that and project the impact. And so I would encourage you to make that proposal to him. Okay, thank you. All right, if there are no other questions, again, I'm Michael Dane, Assistant City Manager. We want to thank you for participating. We believe this is why local government is one of the most effective of the levels of government, is because of our closeness and your participation. So we thank you for being here, thank you for participating, and we'll see you Tuesday at council. Thank you.